In questo episodio del podcast sto guiando in Galles su un Alfa Romeo. Hello and welcome to Gareth Jones on Speed. I'm Gareth, and I don't know how good your Italian is, but you probably worked out that what I said before the start of this programme was I'm driving to Wales in an Alfa Romeo, which is something that makes me very happy for the obvious reasons. A, I'm going to Wales. B, an Alfa Romeo. And I'm not certain if it should be in that order. Maybe I should be more excited about driving an Alfa Romeo for the first time, I think, in my life. I don't know how I managed to get to 58 years old without ever having driven an Alfa. Yeah, I've driven Lancias. I've had mates who owned Alfas. Zog had an Alfa. My mate Chris had an Alfa GTV6, which I rode in. But I don't think I've ever driven either of those two cars. Really scratching my brain here. So I thought I'd better do something about it. Let me explain. A good mate of mine died recently. Someone who's just a couple of years older than me. And he is the third of my cohort to have died recently. When you get to sort of, close to your 60s, suddenly it's not just like your grandparents and your parents who are dying, it's your age group. So you get a sense of your mortality, and there's a huge list of things you're supposed to do before you die, and on there is drive more Italian cars. So I'm making sure. I'm not saying I'm worried about dying. I'm not. Hopefully I've got at least another 3 months. 3.5 maybe. But my plan is to try and drive as many cars as I can at the moment that I've never driven before. There are many brands I have driven, but some brands I haven't. So I'm driving an Alfa. So what does Alfa Romeo mean to you? Well, Italian, sporting, stylish, lightweight, performance, raughty. Is that even a real word? But you know what I mean? That's what Alfa Romeo's all about. So you'd expect me to be driving an Alfa Romeo sports car, and I am, sort of, because I'm driving an SUV, and apparently the S in SUV stands for sport utility vehicle. It's a big, tall car. It's the Stelvio, but it's the Nero Edizione, the Nero Edition, which I didn't realise until the car was delivered just a couple of hours ago, is actually four-wheel drive. I thought it would be a rear-wheel drive car, but it is a four-wheel drive car. It's a 2.2 litre turbo diesel, delivering about 190 brake horsepower and 450 torques, so plenty of that twisty stuff to tear up the roads. And, well, is it really a sports car though? Can SUVs be sports cars? Yeah, they can. You ask anyone who's driven Jaguar I-Pace, is that a sports car? Yeah. The Jaguar E-Pace or the F-Pace, they could be sports cars. The Porsche Cayenne, sports car. The Porsche Macan, definitely a sports car. So it is possible to draw that Venn diagram. Yeah, there are Audis, aren't there? There are Audi Q5, Q6. I've lost track of the Audis. Q5, that would be a sports car, wouldn't it? Well, some versions of it are. The Quattro. Well, I suppose this is like an Alfa Quattro in some respect. It's got semi-permanent, on-demand four-wheel drive, in that it's a rear-wheel drive car that moves anything up to 50% of the torque to the front wheels should grip or performance demand that. I'm still coming to terms with the car. I've only driven, about 30 miles in it so far from my home in North London up the M1, and here I am travelling at 50 miles per hour. That's okay. because, like all good, well-equipped modern cars costing around £41,000, this car has adaptive cruise, so I've got my feet off the pedals, and it was really intuitive to set up the cruise, the adaptive cruise, to function. That's always a worry when you get in a car and you haven't had a chance to read the manual. You know, am I going to be able to work out how to do all this? But yeah, pretty intuitive. The infotainment system's a bit odd. I only say odd because it's unlike anything I've experienced before, because I think this technology is probably shared with, I don't know, Chryslers and Fiats. Can't remember the last time I drove a Fiat. Drove a Chrysler a few years ago, but I doubt if that had the same kit that was in this car. So it took a while just to adapt to that. Not too long. I was able to pair my phone within seconds. There's a nice big knurled knob sitting down in the transmission tunnel for me to manage the infotainment system. The screen, I've got it laid out in a slightly odd way at the moment. I've got a smaller part of the screen on the right hand side with the navigation, then a big part of the screen just doing the menu options, and that seems a bit, well, my dad used to say about bum about face is the nice way of saying it, you know, wrong way round. So I will investigate the settings for that and fiddle with that when I'm not actually driving or recording the programme, see if I can improve that. My initial reaction to the car, it's quite a big car. Yeah, quite tall. It's taller than me, over 6 foot tall. It's grey, absolutely grey. I like that kind of Q car grey. Most Alfas are red, aren't they? And they scream Italian, which is lovely and beautiful, but sometimes you want to be a bit subtle, don't you? And this car is, yeah, subtle grey. I don't think anyone realises what a performance car this is, and I'm yet to find out how much of a performance car it is, but I will have plenty of opportunity to do that as I get to North Wales, of course. The transmission is interesting. I've got paddles and I've got 3 modes, and lovely Andy, the chap who dropped off the car, gave me the 30-second briefing on what's going on with the car so I could pull away, and I'm not entirely certain he understood what the 3 modes were. He said, you've got 3 modes, A, N and D. N is normal and A is automatic. You've got D. I don't think he really knew. So I looked it up. What they say is N is not normal, it is natural, naturale. Oh, there's an F-Type pulling alongside me. Not an F-Type, a, what do you call it, F-Pace. Looks slightly bigger than this car. I think I'm probably about the size of an E-Pace. Could be wrong. Very similar sort of looking car in many ways, you know, bulbous, sporting SUV. So back to the transmission. N is naturale. A, I think it was advanced efficiency, I think it said it stood for. So that's your eco mode. It limits torque, keeps the car in a higher gear all the time, so it's, you know, trying to be maximum efficiency. And then there's D, which stands for dynamic. That's your sporting mode, which switches between being highly strung and being super relaxed, perhaps. I'm hoping it tends towards highly strung, because Alfa Romeos should be highly strung, shouldn't they? They should be a little nervous, they should be a little twitchy, a little way, you know what I mean? Like Paul Whitehouse used to say in the Fast Show. It should be an exciting car. It should be full of brio, and I apologise for saying the word brio whilst reviewing an Alfa Romeo. I know it's a cliche, but you've got to say a car with a bit of brio. You buy an Alfa Romeo because you want something with a bit of spirit to it, don't you? Spirito? Is that even a word? A bit of brio. My initial reaction to the interior of the car, I have to say, little bit disappointing. Only because it's got this sort of horizontal fake wood strip along the dash that is quite clearly fake wood. It's plastic and it's completely black. I'm sure there are versions of this car, the non-Nero Edizione, forgive me, which that's probably coloured more like wood, a bit more, brown and naturalistic looking. But in the black, it just looks like, when you get a scale X-Trick and they have some rough parts to the outside of the track, and you can tell that it's trying to look like the real thing, but it isn't the real thing. That's what this horizontal black strip is. So that's the only letdown inside here. The dash is nice, real instruments, not a TFT. 2 real instruments with a TFT dash, I think 7-inch, as they say in old money, in the middle, which you can reconfigure. But all the other instruments are real. Quite sporting looking, very pretty. Haven't seen any surprise and delight features yet. Nothing that springs up and surprises you when you turn it on, but I'm sure I'll see something. Took me a little while to get the seating position exactly right. Not uncomfortable. It's just that being an Italian car, I was expecting to be able to have long arms and short legs. That's classic sort of Lancia Alfa. But you sit a bit high in this, it's a bit tricky to do that. And because I've got quite long arms and quite short legs, really. And so that means I had to push the steering wheel close to the dash so I could get close enough for the pedals. And unfortunately, I was so close to the dash that the 2 pointy hoods over the binnacles, very Alfa Romeo, if you think about that, projected so far out from the dash that I was concerned I was going to wrap me knuckles as I held the steering wheel every time I turned the wheel left and right. So I thought, no, I'm going to have to do something about that. So I adjusted the steering wheel so it's a little bit further away from the dash, and that's pushed my feet a little bit further away from the pedal. So I'm not uncomfortable, but I do feel a little close, a bit upright at the moment. I'm sure I'll work that out as I get an opportunity to do that. But yeah, initial impressions are, didn't like the plastic on the dash on the inside. Everything else, Alfa Romeo. But if I'm being honest, Alfas have always had a slight whiff of disappointment about them, haven't they? That's actually part of the Alfa experience, and I don't mean that in a cruel way, because when you buy an Alfa, you want something that's not a Fiat, but not a Maserati or a Ferrari either. It's, something in between, one step up from a Fiat, a sporting Fiat that's not an Abarth, it's an Alfa, it's got heritage. Oh, do you know why I chose this car, talking about heritage? I watch Formula 1 on TV live, which means I watch it on Sky. And who is sponsoring Sky's F1 output at the moment? Alfa Romeo. The Stelvio, not just Alfa Romeo, this car is sponsoring it. So, I watch a lot of it. That means I've been hammered subliminally by this advert. You want to drive an Alfa Romeo. Do you remember when I was watching Game of Thrones? I had to drive a Volvo. I am such a sucker for car advertising. And I'm very happy, to see Alfa Romeo sponsoring Formula 1. Because they are one of the originali, aren't they? Wasn't the first car that won the World Championship an Alfa Romeo driven by Farina? Well, I might be wrong on that. But Alfa Romeo and F1 have got a tremendous heritage, and of course they're back in F1 rebadging Sauber as Alfa Romeo, which is a bit of a push, but they do have Ferrari engines, so yeah, it's arguably a better fit in Formula 1 than Red Bull being sponsored by Aston Martin, but simply having Honda engines. Admittedly, you've got a Red Bull designer designing Aston Martin road cars, but what input have Aston Martin got into race cars? At the moment, not very much, but hopefully for the hypercar class at Le Mans in a few years, quite a lot. I think Adrian Newey will have an awful lot to do with that car that races at Le Mans. But hey, I've gone off topic. I'm talking about the relationship between Aston Martin and Red Bull, and I should be talking about the relationship between Alfa Romeo and Sauber. Well, they have Kimi Raikkonen driving for them, so that makes them cool. And they have Antonio Giovinazzi driving for them, and he's Italian, so that's good Italian credentials if they're hammering the brand home. Alfa Romeo is a great brand, and as we discussed in the last episode of Gareth Jones on Speed, it's now been absorbed into a megalith that takes in FCA and PSA. And will Alfa Romeo survive? I'm hoping it does, because it is a strong brand, and I know that there have been plans to rationalise the cars that Alfa Romeo were planning on making, and some have gone by the wayside. I think the replacement for the 4C or the 8C has been cancelled, but the replacement for the Stelvio is going ahead, and there is a new smaller Alfa SUV which I can't quite remember what it's called now. Is it called the Toneo or something like that? The Trofeo? No, Tonale? Can't quite remember, but I remember seeing a picture of it and thinking, wowzer, that's a cracking looking car. And of course Alfas have got to look good, and there have been some very, very good looking Alfas over the years, apart from the, what was it called, the Arna, the Alfa Romeo Nissan project, which was actually a Nissan Cherry, wasn't it, built in the Alfa Sud factory, I think, the factory in the south of Italy. But hey, I'm getting way off topic now. Love Alfa Romeo, perhaps because, as you know, I'm Lancisti. I love Lancia, and you can't buy Lancias in Britain anymore, so the nearest thing you might have to a Lancia is an Alfa Romeo. So I'm very happy to be in this car. Wouldn't it be great if you could take one of the Alfa platforms and rebadge it as a Lancia? But hey, yeah, that's another conversation, and another conversation I will have with you will be about what this car is like to drive. It's great on the motorway. I have to say it's effortless so far, and I'm sure it will be loads of fun on some of the roads I intend to take it on in North Wales as soon as I get there. Yes, you'll enjoy this episode, I hope, because I'm enjoying driving this car. Yeah, can you tell? I'm sounding up. Do you think I sound a bit up and fizzing? Yeah, I think that's called brio. Grazie, Alfa Romeo. Grazie. Hello again. It's Friday today, I had to think about that, and I've been up in North Wales and Liverpool in the Alfa Romeo Stelvio for about 3 days now, and I've been enjoying living with an Italian car in Wales. Kind of appropriate, I think, because this car is called the Alfa Romeo Stelvio, and the Stelvio, of course, is a famous pass, isn't it? An alpine pass. And I've been staying near Conwy in a place called Sychnant, on the Sychnant Pass. So maybe Sychnant is the Welsh equivalent of Stelvio. What are you driving? An Alfa Romeo Sychnant. Doesn't quite work as well, does it, as Stelvio? Italian words are great. But I've been having lots of fun. One of the questions, here we go, you can ask about this car: does it have Alfa Romeo in its DNA? Yes, I didn't realise before. But you know the three settings for the transmission, A, N and D? If you like, it could be D, N and A. D, N, A. Fair play to Alfa for contriving that for their three modes. That made me laugh and smile, I have to admit. I didn't dislike it. And actually, I've been driving in the D mode, and it really does step it down a gear and a half. I forgot to mention it's got an 8-speed gearbox with paddles, which are great. It's got a diesel engine, which, you know, makes great use of those 8 ratios, and it's easy to switch between them. Put it in D mode and start popping up and down, and you really are driving a proper rewarding car. It's not like driving a big old floaty people carrier. Even with these big 20-inch wheels, well, because of those 20-inch wheels, it sticks like to a blanket, as my dad used to say. So I have no complaints in the is it rewarding to drive mode, as well as being really practical. All that stuff like the electric tailgate with a close and lock button, really nice. The locking system seems perfectly logical on the car. I've adapted mostly to the entertainment system, although I still haven't worked out how to input postcodes. You can put in names of cities and streets, but I've found that it's a user thing. I'm certain you can, because it says city or postcode, but if I put in a postcode, it just comes up with a city. It doesn't quite understand the location I'm putting in. But like I say, sort of thing you have to deal with when you're learning a car very quickly. But the more intuitive it is, the more comfortable you feel about it, and the better review the car gets. This wasn't immediately apparent, even to someone who drives lots of different cars, like me, as you know. But hey, there are always things which trip you up. Not the tripometer, pun intended. That was pretty good. The trip, I often have trouble trying to reset the trip to work out the economy and what have you. Not in this car. Worked that one out, pretty straightforward. Cycle through some switches on one of your stalks, get it up on the screen in the front, and then hold for 3 seconds, reset. Easy. There's a new version of the Stelvio coming, I believe, which is going to have a full TFT screen, doing away with real instruments. Is that an improvement? Probably give you a bit of versatility, but I rather like the sporting quality of the real old-fashioned instruments on this car at the moment. Yeah. And the terrible thing has happened. I worked out something. Never occurred to me before. Think about it, the name, Alfa Romeo. What does it imply to you? I don't mean, but what does it imply, apart from all the motoring heritage? What do the actual words say to you? Alpha, the first, the beginning, A, the top, if you like. Romeo, or Romeo if you say it with an Italian accent, but Romeo, the greatest Italian lover. So Alfa Romeo is either the top Italian lover or your first Italian lover. That's quite an emotional name for a car. It's hinting at something, an emotional resonance there, which perhaps is one of the reasons for the car's success. It's got that subliminal undercurrent of meaning. Alfa Romeo, you must love me, and I do love this car. In some ways it's an ultra integrale, isn't it? The nearest thing there is, because that's the thing about these SUVs now. They're really super hatches, aren't they? They're sort of bodywork to wheel size and general relative sizes, I suppose, are more akin to a hatchback than anything else. A small hatchback, scale it up and you get this, and it does feel like a big car. I did find myself having to look out of the window to see how close we are to the curb exactly, so I didn't scuff these massive 20-inch wheels, and I didn't, but I'm used to driving biggish cars, but this does feel big. Very often you say, oh, you get used to it. I'm not sure. It does feel like a big car, and in terms of size, it's more, what's it called? Nissan Q, what's the trail? The N Trail? The Nissan N Trail. That's what it's going to be called now, rather than a smaller Nissan like the, what's the one they build in Washington, Tyneham Weir? The Qashqai. It's bigger than a Qashqai. X-Trail, that's what it's called. I'm going to call it the N-Trail from now on. Cruel. But yeah, really enjoying this car. Proper driving car. I've had it in that economy mode as well, and that just stops you from chasing around at ridiculous speeds. When I'm driving through some places, I drive like that, and driving through other places, I make sure I'm in the driver mode. I have to say, coming through Conwy, coming down the Sucknant Pass, I realised as I drove towards my friend's house on the Sucknant Pass that there's a temporary chicane has been installed by the cattle grid that leads into the start of Snowdonia National Park, the bit called the Carneddau, and I have to cross this to get to my friend's house. And they put this little chicane in. Well, what is it you do when you're in a driver's car? You see a chicane, you don't slow down, you accelerate. Oh, let's see how it manages this. And I have to say, I've gone through that chicane at speeds a vehicle of this height should struggle with its mass, but it didn't. It jinked through with great composure. And I thought that was good, and that's quite an achievement. And I'm wondering how they do that. They have to do it with lightness, you have to do it with good body control, and you can do it with some electronics as well. So I'm wondering if all three of those things have combined to make that possible. I did read in the spec that some of the suspension components of this car are composite. Interesting. We're talking about carbon fibre and steel. We're talking about carbon fibre and aluminium. We're talking about, I don't know, magnesium and carbon fibre, magnesium and steel, magnesium and aluminium. I don't know what sort of combinations are possible if they're talking about composites. But is that a hybrid composite? What are they using? But if that's how they've got the lightness down, I don't know the actual weight of the car. I will look that up and find out what it actually is, the weight of the car. But if they've used lightness to make this car do what it does, I'm very, very pleased about that, because that's proper Alfa Romeo, isn't it? I think I said earlier on in the Alfa DNA there was lightness. Okay, let's try something. Listen to this. Here we go. Call John Bryn Jones home.
John Bryn Jones, home. Please say yes or no.
Yes. I'm calling my
Darling.
brother. Just showing you that the interaction of the speech recognition is very good and worked very well. It learned immediately and got things right. Very easy to use. I like that a lot. Better than any push button system. Hi John, shwmae?
Right,
Dwi ar fy ffordd fydda efo ti ymhen llai na chwarter awr.
Chwarter awr, o gorau.
Na I stopio yn dysert i bigo fyny dy fferyllau.
O, da iawn.
Alright.
Alright. Yn siarad Cymraeg yma, mae bobl.
Ie, okay. Wel, na I gofyn yn Gymraeg yn y fferylla felly.
Pwy?
Na I gofyn iddyn nhw yn y fferylla yn Gymraeg felly.
Ceisio.
Na I trio. Alright, hwyl.
Hwyl.
Yeah, it's a shame it doesn't have a Sim-Tran. Otherwise you'd be able to understand what I said to my brother. It is not of any consequence. He wants me to pick up some medicine for him from the local fferylla, the local pharmacy on the way through. So that's what I'll do. Yeah, so you can see that this car is easy to live with. It's got baggage hooks in the boot. So it's practical. You know, you can stick your shopping and plastic bags, which you have to pay for in Wales, of course. You can hang them off hooks and it doesn't spill. We brought our own bags with us, actually. And that makes it practical. Curious, you know, people living in North Wales probably need a higher riding car than those of us who are purely city dwellers. So often people live, not just in urban areas in North Wales, but the people I know live, as you know, in the Snowdonia National Park, and parking for them might be on soft ground, as it is for my friends Carol and Steve. So having a car with four-wheel drive, which means if you do have to put two wheels in the wet stuff to get out of the way of cars going by, then you can get out again. I've been caught out with my Sora being quite low and just rear-wheel drive in the past, but this car doesn't seem to have that problem. So a bit of ability from a tall car. We don't all need tall cars, but you can see why some people choose tall cars, especially living in the countryside. And a four-wheel drive, where, you know, things get icy here in the cold north of Wales, and we've got some pretty severe slopes. So four-wheel drive is helpful in those sorts of circumstances, as long as you've got the right winter tyres. Otherwise you're not making it easy for yourself in big, wide, grippy tyres. This is interesting. I'm on the A55 and we've just come out of Colwyn Bay before we get to Abergele, and all the traffic has ground down to a halt. So the 15 minutes I said I'd be with my brother ain't going to be 15 minutes. Well, it is Friday and it is, what time is it now? 4:10. So yeah, hey, okay, what else can I tell you about this car? Oh yeah, two things. Just reading up about the spec of the car, I think you can order this car. This is the Nero Edition, which is all dark and muted. Nero playing the violin while Rome burnt, while the empire collapsed. Is that a really good name for a car? Probably not. But I think you can also order this car with red interior leather, which would be really nice. I'd like that. The black's good. The heated electric seats have been great here in November in North Wales. Really need it on frosty mornings because leather's cold, as you know. But yeah, that red interior would be nice, but a terrible thing happened. I drove to see my sister who lives in Urwyddgrug or nearby. And as I got nearby, I noticed there was an Alfa Brera for sale in a local second-hand dealership. Nothing very posh, this place, just a row of largely Nissan Micras and old Nissan Primeras, but there was a Brera there, and it was Rosso red, and it was £4,200, I think. I may have to have a look at it. If it's the petrol, I might buy it. Feeling a bit crazy, and I need a car for Christmas, and I've got a bit of an Alfa bug. Having driven an Alfa, you realise that it's quite easy to form an emotional bond with them, and you can't buy decent Lancias in Britain anymore, not in right-hand drive. So maybe I should allow myself to drift over to Alfa Romeo. What do you think? I don't know. I might just go and have a look at it if I'm passing my sisters and see what sort of condition it's in, because of course it's a Giugiaro design, and I've always said Giugiaro is my favourite designer, and I adored the Brera when it came out. I know that the car that was on the road was a bit more of a fat hatch pudding than a coupe, but actually that fat hatch pudding / coupe might just do my current needs. So I'll have a think about that. I don't know what Violet will say if I suddenly turned up in a red Alfa Romeo. Let's find out. No, I'm going to go look at it. Maybe. But yeah, Alfa Romeo, it's emotional, isn't it?
Gareth Jones on speed!
God, I'm miserable. Well, not that miserable. Just allowing myself to lose myself in the miserable weather that I'm now driving my Alfa Romeo Stelvio in. And no, before you make an assumption, I'm not in Wales. It's raining in England too. I'm actually on the M6 passing through Birmingham on my way back to London. Miserable for 3 reasons. Number 1, it's raining. It's miserable. Number 2, I'm going to my mate's funeral on Monday. That makes you miserable. And number 3, I've got to give this car back as well. And I'm quite attached to her, him, it now. Yeah, genuinely attached. I did some proper driving while I was in Wales. As you know, one of my favourite roads to drive spiritedly on is what's known as the Mould Denby Road, a little A road, a B road I suppose, a B road with lots of wiggly bits. And I took this little baby for actually not a little baby, I took this big baby for a bit of a fiddle down that road, because it's supposed to be a driver's car, isn't it, an Alfa Romeo? And you know what? It is. It ruddy well is, and you don't even need to be in the drive mode, which is really good, by the way. By gum, it wants to play when you're in that mode. It really, really, really does. It is a driver's car. And yet, having said that, it is also one of the most stable cars I've ever driven, which is unusual for something over 6 foot tall. It shouldn't be as stable as it is. And when I say stable, I don't mean in roll and pitch. I mean in tracking straight. Most of the time, this car, I can take my hands off the steering wheel and it will stay in the lane. It won't drift, and it's got no lane control to do that for you. No, it just goes straight and true. And I'm just wondering if it has got some sort of subtle driving assistance that takes care of that. I know it has at insane velocities when you really are chucking it about. The electric steering is handled by the onboard computer and will help the car go where you want it to go. So I'm wondering if it's doing that while we're going in a straight line. And I have to say, I am in huge admiration of the way that it does that. It really does just go straight. No fidgeting, no fiddling, just goes along. And yet when you ask it to do the stuff of a ballerina, to be immediately off balance and able to fall and tumble in any direction, it is more than happy to do that, extremely happy to do that. It wants you to do that. Like Khan says to Kirk, it begs me, it asks you, it demands of you that you do that. And it is really happy to tuck in its nose. The ride on this car is very good. I picked up some people who were carrying them around, friends I was staying with today, and they all said, oh, isn't the ride nice? But I think they spend most of their time in a battered old Honda Civic. So I'm pretty sure pretty much anything that they drive will be a bit softer and smoother than that old knackered Civic, believe me. The ride is good. It's not as good as the Kia Stinger I had. That, being a low car with quite a long wheelbase, was able to smooth out pitching very easily. This car, you're aware of pitching, and you're also aware of a bit of jiggle in roll, a bit of jiggle. Nothing unpleasant or distracting, but noticeably more than you would get in a low saloon, a sort of a GT saloon, if you like. Of course, you can't change the laws of physics. But one thing that this car does handle well is float. I drove over some very quickly roads, and there are some crests that you rise over, and it doesn't allow you to, float and then sit back down on the suspension. It keeps that all under control. I think it's a very composed car, performance not lacking in any way whatsoever. And in terms of economy, I got 36 miles to the gallon on the first tank, which included boring old motorway and lots of spirited Welsh stuff. At the moment it's telling me it's averaging 38 miles to the gallon, so it's been fairly consistent. A 2.2 litre diesel, useful. Do you know what, it's been a while, I think, since I've mentioned to you what songs the car I'm driving seems to like. I've had this theory for many years that certain cars have certain resonant frequencies and like, if you like, certain types of music or even individual tracks. That being, there was a track I listened to in the car which sounded particularly good, and that's how I arrive at these conclusions. I think I must have told you this. I had a Saab many years ago that quite liked Strauss. It liked the waltz. Not really my sort of thing, but if ever I heard a waltz in that car, it sounded great. Amazing. But the Stelvio, the music has been largely coming from my phone. Definitely some DAB music as well. But the stuff that came off my phone that stood out, two tracks in particular. One called Ya Soshla Sumar, which isn't Welsh, it's Russian. Ya Soshla Sumar. It was a single released by Tattoo, those two Russian girls, many, many, many years ago. It was released in English. I think it was called All the Things She Said. But the Russian version, Ya Soshla Sumar, I much prefer. It's really alliterative, great, and that sounded amazing in this car. Why would music sung by two Russian, apparently lesbians, sound good in a full-blooded Alfa Romeo Italian car? I have no explanation for that. I cannot post-rationalise that at all for you. No. But the other track that also stood out in this car was Jump Around by House of Pain, and I don't know if there's any hidden meaning in that as well. Does this car jump around? No. Amazingly stable, but is ready to be driven, to change direction if you ask it, but otherwise no, it doesn't jump around uncontrollably. House of Pain, owning an Alfa Romeo, maybe once upon a time owning an Alfa Romeo was indeed a whole world of pain. Mainly electrical, I think, apart from mechanical issues. But no, I doubt this car is a House of Pain at all. But they are the two tracks this car particularly enjoyed. Ya Soshla Sumar, All the Things She Said, I think it's called, by Tattoo, and Jump Around by House of Pain, the remix.
Gareth Jones on speed.
If I had one criticism of this car, it would be its size. It feels a little bulky. Maybe it's just the stance, it has this very broad footprint, very wide track, and it's not a narrow car as a result. So maybe that function of it being such a good thing to drive is a function of the shape it is. It's much wider than it should be for its height, and it makes it feel bulkier. I haven't found it difficult to park, not at all. It's almost impossible to find a car difficult to park these days unless it's got massive overhangs and no rear view camera and no proximity warning beepers. But this car has all of that. Great rear camera, great proximity, great lock on the electric steering, and not difficult to park, but perhaps not as easy to park as you might hope. It does feel big, so maybe the next size down would be a better car or a more comfortable car to live with. I'm thinking the Tonale. You know, there's a new Alfa Romeo SUV coming that they did a concept for. I think it's called the Tonale, which is, you know, half a size smaller. And I bet that'll be magnificent. That won't feel big. I mean, I'm not saying that this feels unwieldy in any way, but it does feel like a big car. Also, while I'm just on the subject, the Tonale, when it arrives, with this new merger between FCA and PSA, who have already absorbed Vauxhall Opel, does that mean that the Tonale will share a platform with the Vauxhall Grandland? The Vauxhall Grandad, it should be called. Doesn't sound very exciting. Tonale, very exciting. Grandland, not exciting. I hope they favour the Alfa Brio as opposed to the Vauxhall dreariness. Do you remember me saying that I was tempted by an Alfa Romeo? Well, I went to have a quick look at it. It's in a place called Sychdyn in North Wales, and I went to look at it, and it's not bad. It's the petrol car, 3.2 litre petrol JTS, is that what they call it? I can't quite remember. It's got 88,000 miles on the clock, and if I was going to buy an Alfa Romeo, would I buy one with nearly 90,000 miles on the clock? It's had the timing chain done. The chap in the dealership, I say dealership, second-hand car sales place, assured me it had been done. I'd like to see evidence of that. But it was very tidy. There wasn't a mark on the body. It was red. It had the right wheels, and the Alfa Romeo badge had all the details rubbed off it on the tailgate, so it had been washed by a car wash machine many times, so maybe it was taken care of. What was it, 2005 I think, the car? I didn't buy it there and then. It's for sale for £4,000, it says on the window. On the website it says £3,500. If I'd made an offer without driving it for £3,200, I might have just had it, because I need a car for my needs for Christmas. I don't own a car at the moment, so I haven't got access to one. So I'll think about it. I'm coming up back to North Wales for a friend's funeral on Tuesday. Maybe if I'm really glum, I might buy myself that Alfa Romeo to cheer me up. I don't know. I'll have to discuss it with Violet first. Let's see what she says. But yeah, intriguing. It's not this Alfa Romeo, is it? I mean, there is a gulf between that beautiful car and the car that I'm driving now, and yet there is a connection. Hear me out on this. The Brera, of course, was designed by Giugiaro, Giorgio Giugiaro, or Giorgetto Giugiaro when he was a young man. And if you look into some of Giugiaro's designs, you may find a car he designed, gosh, when was it? Late 80s possibly, called the Ital Landau, if memory serves, the Landau, which may have been built on a Lexus platform. I can't quite recall, but it was a very innovative and influential car. It was a big hatchback. Giugiaro had reasoned that the small hatchback was very popular and worked really well, and we had long hatchbacks, basically saloons which had a hatchback back, you know, kind of a lift back thing, but we didn't have a big hatchback, a car that followed the proportions of, say, a Golf, but was 1.5 twice the size. And that sort of car never really caught on until we discovered SUVs. You may remember a little bit earlier on I described this car as a mega hatchback, in that it was just a giant hatchback. The wheel size in relation to the body size, in relation to the width of the car, to the length of the car, it's essentially a giant scale hatchback. So Giugiaro, as well as designing one of the loveliest of recent looking Alfas, because I do think the Brera is a great looking car, even if it is just a front wheel drive mega hatch / coupe, but he also designed the car that most of us drive these days, the SUV. Even Alfa Romeo, a sports car, is an SUV. So what do you get for that? You get an art car. Because of this car's high ride, you have the ability to ford small streams should you need, or park on soft verges here in North Wales without being afraid of not being able to get out. And you can get out because of the Q4 transmission, the four-wheel drive, which allows you to pull out if you lose slip from any wheel, and makes it a better driver's car. So here I am bumping over the Birmingham bumps. Can you hear them? Bum. Ba-dum, ba-dum, probably. In a car which I have to say has amazing abilities. It's generous inside. There's a big boot. It's reasonably economical. And it drives like an Alfa Romeo. So how about that? A car with what some might argue ultimate ability. The ability to be driven like a sports car, the ability to function like a family car, and the ability to fall over things like a 4x4. That, sir, is a lot of car for your £41,000. I haven't got a bad thing to say about this Stelvio. Really like it. The worst thing is the black plastic trim on the dash. That's not good. Everything else about this car is really good. Exceptional, I would say. It influenced me to consider buying an Alfa Romeo from a different age to this car, an Alfa Romeo that I'm sure isn't as reliable, isn't as well built, isn't the performance and handling car that this is. It made me consider buying a Brera. When I get back to London, I'm going to spend time looking at second-hand Breras and wondering whether I should buy one now, and I will test one, and I bet it's not as good as this Stelvio. It's a great car, and it's got character. Yeah, I've fallen in love with Romeo as Juliet did. That's it. You've been listening to Gareth Jones on Speed. I'm Gareth. Arrivederci. Ciao, Bella.
To send us an email, see pictures, get song lyrics, join our Facebook fan site, follow us on Twitter, or to find out about sponsorship opportunities, go to garethjones.tv.
Tiny postscript to this programme. I finally did work out how to arrange the screen in a better way so it displayed navigation larger than the menu, and eventually worked out how to input postcodes. You have to put a space in between the first 3 digits and the last 3 digits. There you go. Got there in the end.
Gareth Jones on Speed is made in London by Whiz Bang.
Gareth Jones on Speed!